Let's be clear about what this video is and isn't. This is not a claim that MMA judges are corrupt. It is not an accusation that any specific individual was paid to score a fight a particular way. What it is a documented analysis of the incentive structures surrounding MMA judging, who employs the judges, who benefits from specific outcomes, and what the documented criteria problems tell us about a system that produces results the sport's own observers call robberies on a regular basis. When those incentive structures are laid out clearly, random is not the best available explanation for the pattern. Who actually controls the judges? This is the part most fight fans don't know, and it is the most important structural fact in this entire conversation. The UFC does not employ the judges who score its fights. The judges are employed and approved by state athletic commissions, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the New York State Athletic Commission, the California State Athletic Commission, and their equivalents in every jurisdiction where fights are held. This creates an apparent separation between the promotion and the people scoring its events. In practice, the relationship is more complicated. The UFC chooses where to hold fights. The UFC negotiates with athletic commissions about the terms under which events are sanctioned. The UFC has a very significant ongoing financial relationship with the commissions that approve its events. The licensing fees, the tax revenues, the economic impact of major pay-per-view events held in a jurisdiction all flow back into a relationship that the commission has a financial interest in maintaining. Commissions do not get to approve events if the promoter decides to take its events elsewhere. The UFC has used site selection as leverage in ways that are documented in its public statements about venue negotiations. The power relationship between the UFC and the athletic commissions that ostensibly regulate it is not one of equals. The judges those commissions assign are approved by commissions whose institutional relationship with the UFC is a long-term, financially significant ongoing arrangement. The documented criteria problems. The unified rules of MMA, which govern judging criteria, describe 4 factors judges should use to assess rounds: effective striking, effective grappling, aggression, and octagon control. The criteria are listed in descending priority. Effective striking and grappling are supposed to outweigh aggression and control. In documented practice, the application of these criteria is inconsistent to a degree that produces outcomes impossible to explain through honest disagreement alone. The first documented problem is that many MMA judges come from boxing backgrounds and apply a scoring philosophy developed for an entirely different sport. In boxing, landing punches is the primary metric, and a fighter who is controlled against the ropes can still win rounds through output. Applied to MMA, this framework systematically undervalues takedowns, ground control, and submission attempts, the grappling component that the unified rules explicitly include as equal in priority to striking. This has been raised specifically in the context of wrestling heavy fighters losing decisions in fights where their control time and takedown success were significant by any objective measure. Judges who are more comfortable evaluating striking exchanges than grappling sequences produce a consistent directional bias against fighters whose best tool is the takedown, which in practice means that wrestling-based fighters face a structural disadvantage in close decisions that has nothing to do with the quality of their performance. The second documented problem is the 10-point must system's inadequacy for close rounds. Championship fights that go to decision are often determined by 1 or 2 rounds that could defensively have been scored either way, and the direction in which those rounds fall follows patterns that are not random when you examine them against the incentive structure over a sufficiently large sample. The third problem, documented specifically in post-fight judge scorecards, is the use of effective aggression, pressing forward, appearing to initiate exchanges, as a tiebreaker in rounds where neither effective striking nor grappling clearly separated the fighters. Aggressive fighters who absorb more punishment than they land can win rounds on this criteria in front of certain judges. This is not a theoretical concern. It is a documented pattern in specific scorecards that have been released publicly and analyzed by the sport's more rigorous statistical observers. The documented cases. Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski in their rematch at UFC 251. CompuStrike data showed Holloway landing more significant strikes in 3 of the 5 rounds. Holloway's corner and virtually every journalist at ringside believed he had done enough to reclaim the title. 2 judges scored it for Volkanovski. The 3rd judge agreed with the press row consensus and scored it for Holloway. The split decision kept the belt on the challenger and removed the most marketable featherweight in UFC history from a belt he had defended 7 times. Volkanovski is a legitimate world-class fighter. This is not a suggestion that he didn't belong in the title conversation. It is a note that the documented striking data and the consensus of people who cover the sport professionally diverged from the official scoring in a fight involving a result that kept a newer champion in place over a figure whose championship run was already well established. Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 165 in 2013, a fight that was competitive enough that multiple observers had Gustafsson winning. Jones won a unanimous decision in what remains one of the closest title fights in light heavyweight history by any objective measure. Jones at that moment was the most valuable fighter in the UFC's light heavyweight division and arguably the promotion as a whole. The decision went his way. It has never been seriously challenged in terms of the judging criteria applied. Robbie Lawler versus Johny Hendricks at UFC 171. Hendricks won the title, and the rematch at UFC 181 produced one of the most scrutinized judging decisions in recent history. The rematch was widely scored for Hendricks by media observers. Two judges disagreed. Hendricks' post-fight comments about the result are documented and specific. Follow the incentives. The incentive structure does not require any judge to receive a phone call, an envelope, or any form of direct instruction. What it requires is that judges who are approved by commissions with long-term relationships with the UFC internalize over time that certain outcomes are more comfortable to produce than others. A judge who regularly scores fights for the challenger over the established champion faces professional attention of a kind that a judge who scores closer fights for the established champion does not. This is not a conspiracy. It is the way institutional incentive structures work in any context. People within systems learn through observation rather than instruction which outcomes make their professional life easier. The cases where this is most visible are championship fights involving a significant pay-per-view asset whose continued marketability depends on them holding a title. A champion who loses on a close decision produces multiple downstream consequences. A rematch clause triggers, future pay-per-view value is recalibrated, the narrative around a division changes. A champion who wins a close decision produces none of those complications. When you look at the documented judging record in close championship fights over the past decade, not all fights, not clear results, but specifically the fights where two competent observers could reasonably score the fight differently, the direction in which the close calls fall follows an observable pattern. Not every robbery is explained by this. Some are genuine incompetence. Some are the honest result of judges applying a flawed criteria document in good faith and arriving at wrong conclusions. But some of them aren't random. The incentives point in a specific direction, and when you look at who benefits from which outcomes over time, the results are pointing the same way. Subscribe if you want to keep looking.